His private life began with a marriage that became one of royal history's most romanticized and unhappy unions. In 1853, Archduchess Sophie invited her sister and nieces to Bad Ischl, intending that Franz Joseph marry the elder daughter Helene. Instead, he fell in love with the younger sister, Elizabeth of Bavaria, known to history as Sisi. She was 15. They married in 1854. Elizabeth was exceptionally beautiful, athletic, intelligent, and resistant to court constraints. Vienna celebrated a fairy tale. The bride entered a system of rigid etiquette, public scrutiny, and conflict with her mother-in-law. Sisi's life has often been transformed into decorative legend, but beneath the portraits and films was a woman struggling with depression, isolation, disordered eating, relentless beauty routines, and the loss of control over her children. She spent hours caring for her extraordinarily long hair, exercised obsessively, rode horses with skill, traveled constantly, learned languages, wrote poetry, and avoided court duties whenever possible. She became sympathetic to Hungary and developed close relationships with Hungarian aristocrats. Her influence would later help soften Franz Joseph's stance toward compromise. The emperor's neo-absolutist system seemed strong, but foreign policy failures exposed its weakness. During the Crimean War, Austria did not join Russia, despite Russian help in suppressing Hungary. Vienna occupied the Danubian principalities and pressured Russia to withdraw, but it also failed to secure a firm alliance with Britain and France. Russia felt betrayed. The Western powers did not feel grateful. Austria emerged diplomatically isolated. In Italy, nationalism and the ambitions of Piedmont Sardinia threatened Habsburg rule. Prime Minister Camillo di Cavour allied Piedmont with Napoleon III of France. In 1859, war began. Austrian forces were defeated at Magenta and Solferino. The Battle of Solferino was so bloody that the Swiss observer Henry Dunant helped inspire the founding of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Franz Joseph personally commanded for part of the campaign but could not reverse the outcome. Austria ceded Lombardy, though it retained Venetia. Military defeat forced constitutional experiments. The October Diploma of 1860 and February Patent of 1861 attempted to establish representative institutions, but they satisfied neither centralists nor federalists. Hungary continued passive resistance, refusing to accept the loss of its historic constitution. Czech leaders demanded recognition. The empire needed reform, yet every formula advantaged some groups and frightened others. The German question brought a greater disaster. For centuries, the Habsburgs had claimed leadership in Germany through the Holy Roman Empire and later the German Confederation. Prussia, strengthened by Silesia and military reforms, challenged that position. Otto von Bismarck, Prussia's minister-president, wanted a German settlement excluding Austria. After cooperation against Denmark in 1864, disputes over Schleswig and Holstein created the pretext for war. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866 lasted only 7 weeks. Prussia's rail mobilization, organization, and needle gun provided advantages. At the decisive Battle of Königgrätz, also known as Zadova, the Austrian army was defeated. Franz Joseph lost leadership in Germany. The German Confederation dissolved, and Prussia constructed a North German Confederation under its control. Austria also ceded Venetia to Italy, despite having defeated Italian forces at Custoza and at sea near Lissa. The Habsburg monarchy was pushed out of both German and Italian national unification. The shock of 1866 made agreement with Hungary unavoidable. Franz Joseph negotiated with Hungarian leader Ferenc Deák and other moderates. Elizabeth supported reconciliation and cultivated Hungarian goodwill. The result was the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, known as the Ausgleich. The Austrian Empire became the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. Franz Joseph was crowned King of Hungary in Budapest with the crown of St. Stephen, the same sacred object Joseph II had avoided. The new arrangement created 2 largely separate states under one monarch. The Austrian half, often called Cisleithania, had its own parliament and government. The Hungarian half, Transleithania, had its own parliament and ministry. They shared foreign affairs, the army, and certain finances, managed through common ministries. Economic and customs arrangements were renegotiated periodically. The compromise restored Hungarian constitutional life and stabilized the monarchy, but it privileged Germans in Austria and Magyars in Hungary while leaving Czechs, Slovaks, Romanians, Croats, Serbs, Ruthenians, Slovenes, Italians, and others dissatisfied in different ways. Croatia received a limited settlement with Hungary in 1868, but many national questions remained unresolved. The dual system was a constitutional machine built around two master nationalities in a state containing many. Yet it was not simply a prison of peoples, as later nationalist propaganda often claimed. It also created a common economic zone of roughly 50 million people, protected by one currency and increasingly connected by railways, rivers, trade, law, and bureaucracy. Subjects could move from rural Galicia to Vienna, from Bohemia to Budapest, from Croatia to industrial centers. Cities grew, universities expanded, newspapers multiplied in many languages. Political parties, labor movements, national associations, and cultural institutions flourished. Vienna transformed physically. The old fortifications were demolished, and the Ringstrasse became a grand boulevard lined with parliament, city hall, university, museums, theaters, opera house, ministries, palaces, and apartment buildings. Architecture turned political ideas into stone. The parliament building evoked classical Greece. The city hall drew on Gothic forms. The university and museums celebrated knowledge and empire. The Ringstrasse announced that the monarchy was modern, wealthy, cultured, and permanent. It was also financed by bankers, industrialists, and bourgeois families, many of them Jewish, whose social rise changed the capital. Budapest underwent an equally dramatic transformation after the unification of Buda, Pest, and Óbuda in 1873. Bridges crossed the Danube, boulevards expanded, parliament rose in monumental neo-Gothic form, and the city became one of Europe's great capitals. Prague, Trieste, Lviv, Zagreb, Krakow, Brno, and other centers developed distinct cultural and political lives. The empire's diversity was visible not only in costumes and folk festivals staged for imperial visits, but in modern schools, factories, cafes, newspapers, banks, and laboratories. For immigrants arriving in the United States from Austria-Hungary, the empire was both homeland and bureaucracy. Between the late 19th century and World War I, millions left its territories for America. Slovaks, Poles, Jews, Croats, Slovenes, Ukrainians, Hungarians, Czechs, and others crossed the Atlantic, settling in cities and industrial regions from New York and Chicago to Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and mining communities. Their descendants would shape American labor, business, religion, food, music, and politics. Many immigrants carried passports marked by Habsburg authority but identified more strongly with a village, language, faith, or nation than with the imperial state. The monarchy's connection to the Americas took a stranger turn in Mexico. In the 1860s, French Emperor Napoleon III intervened in Mexico, hoping to establish a friendly Catholic empire while the United States was consumed by civil war. Mexican conservatives invited Franz Joseph's younger brother, Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian, to accept the crown. Maximilian was cultured, idealistic, and restless. He had served as commander of the Austrian Navy and built the romantic Miramare Castle near Trieste with his Belgian wife, Charlotte. In 1864, Maximilian and Charlotte sailed to Mexico and established their court at Chapultepec Castle. He imagined a liberal monarchy that could reconcile factions. He supported some reforms associated with the deposed Republican government, including limits on church property and protections for indigenous communities, alienating conservatives who had invited him. Republicans under Benito Juárez rejected foreign-imposed monarchy. French troops sustained the empire, while Mexico endured brutal civil war. After the American Civil War ended in 1865, the United States increased diplomatic and military pressure on France under the Monroe Doctrine and supported the Juárez government. Napoleon III withdrew his forces. Charlotte traveled to Europe seeking help and suffered a psychological collapse from which she never recovered. Maximilian refused or failed to escape in time. Republican forces captured him at Querétaro. In June 1867, he was executed by firing squad alongside 2 Mexican generals. Before his death, he reportedly gave coins to the soldiers and asked them to aim at his heart, not his face, so his mother might recognize him. The execution shocked European courts and humiliated the Habsburg family. Edouard Manet painted versions of the event that compared it implicitly to modern political murder. For Americans, the episode marked the reassertion of U.S. influence after the Civil War. For Mexicans, it became part of the triumph of Republican sovereignty over foreign intervention. For Franz Joseph, it was one more family tragedy produced by the collision between dynastic imagination and nationalism. The decades after the compromise were among the most creative and contradictory in Habsburg history. Austria-Hungary possessed elections, parliaments, courts, newspapers, political parties, and a growing civil society. But voting rights were limited and uneven. The emperor remained powerful. Ministers needed parliamentary support in some matters but also depended on the crown. Emergency decrees could bypass legislatures. In Hungary, Magyar political elites controlled a kingdom in which only about half the population spoke Hungarian as a first language. Policies of Magyarization pressed schools and administration toward Hungarian language and identity, provoking resistance among Slovaks, Romanians, Serbs, Croats, and others. In the Austrian half, nationality politics often paralyzed parliament. German liberals had once expected to dominate the constitutional state, but Czech, Polish, Slovene, Italian, Ruthenian, and other representatives demanded influence. Language questions became explosive because language determined access to schools, courts, government jobs, and social advancement. A regulation requiring officials in Bohemia to know both German and Czech could appear to one community as justice and to another as exclusion. Parliamentary deputies shouted, obstructed proceedings, rang bells, and sometimes fought. Yet the very intensity of conflict showed that groups believed imperial institutions mattered enough to contest. The Habsburg bureaucracy developed a reputation for paperwork, uniforms, rubber stamps, official titles, and patient absurdity. Later writers would turn it into dark comedy. Franz Kafka, born in Prague in 1883 to a German-speaking Jewish family, grew up amid overlapping Czech, German, Jewish, imperial, and urban identities. His fictional courts and inaccessible authorities were not simple portraits of Austria-Hungary, but readers have often recognized something Habsburg in their endless corridors and rules. Robert Musil later called the Imperial Austrian half Caecania, derived from the abbreviation KK, Imperial Royal, and portrayed a state so complicated that it seemed both highly organized and incapable of decision. The empire's complexity also generated remarkable intellectual cross-pollination. Vienna became a center of medicine, psychology, economics, music, architecture, philosophy, and art. Sigmund Freud developed psychoanalysis in a city obsessed with respectability and hidden desire. Gustav Klimt painted glittering bodies and uneasy faces. Gustav Mahler transformed the symphony, drawing on military bands, folk songs, funeral marches, and spiritual longing. Arnold Schoenberg pushed music toward atonality. Otto Wagner and Adolf Loos challenged architectural tradition. In Prague, writers moved among languages and national worlds. In Budapest, scientists, mathematicians, and entrepreneurs emerged from modern schools and urban culture. The monarchy's universities educated people who later carried ideas across Europe and America. Jewish emancipation was one of the era's most significant changes. Restrictions had been eased gradually, and the Constitution of 1867 established civic equality in the Austrian half. Jewish families moved to cities, entered professions, built businesses, founded newspapers, and became patrons of culture. Many embraced German or Hungarian language and identity, believing the empire offered protection against ethnic nationalism. At the same time, anti-Semitic politics grew. Vienna's mayor Karl Lueger built a mass movement using anti-Semitic rhetoric, even while maintaining personal and political relationships with Jews. Franz Joseph disliked Lueger and delayed confirming him as mayor, but eventually yielded. The coexistence of legal equality, cultural success, prejudice, and political hatred foreshadowed darker futures. Nationalism did not move in a single direction. Many subjects could feel Czech and loyal to the emperor, Polish and Austrian, Croatian and Habsburg, Jewish and Hungarian, or German-speaking and Bohemian. Imperial identity often sat beside local and national identities rather than replacing them. The army became one of the monarchy's great integrative institutions. Commands were complicated by language diversity, and regiments developed local characters, but officers served a supranational dynasty. The common army swore loyalty to Franz Joseph personally. Its uniforms, ceremonies, and regulations created an imperial world that stretched from alpine villages to the plains of Hungary and the mountains of Bosnia. The emperor's own life became increasingly austere. Franz Joseph and Elizabeth grew apart. She traveled across Europe and the Mediterranean, spending time in Hungary, Greece, England, and on the island of Corfu, where she built the Achillaion Palace dedicated to the Greek hero Achilles. She avoided Vienna whenever possible. The emperor formed a long companionship with actress Katharina Schratt, apparently encouraged or at least tolerated by Elizabeth, who hoped the relationship would ease his loneliness. Franz Joseph remained emotionally restrained and bound to duty, signing documents even on days of personal disaster. The greatest disaster struck at Mayerling in January 1889. Crown Prince Rudolf, the emperor's only son and heir, was intelligent, scientifically curious, politically liberal, and deeply unhappy. He disagreed with his conservative father and felt trapped by court expectations. His marriage to Princess Stephanie of Belgium had deteriorated. Rudolf suffered from illness, drug use, depression, and a series of affairs. At the hunting lodge of Mayerling, he died with his 17-year-old mistress, Baroness Mary Vetzera. Evidence indicates a murder-suicide. Rudolf killed Mary and then himself, though secrecy and inconsistent official statements produced endless conspiracy theories. The court tried to control the story because suicide threatened Rudolf's Catholic burial and the monarchy's moral image. The Vatican granted permission for burial in the imperial crypt after accepting that mental disturbance had impaired responsibility. Mary Vetzera's body was secretly transported and buried. For Elizabeth, the death was devastating. She wore black for the rest of her life and withdrew further. For the dynasty, Mayerling altered the succession. Franz Joseph's brother Karl Ludwig became next in line, followed by Karl Ludwig's son Franz Ferdinand. Elizabeth's own death came violently in 1898. In Geneva, an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini was looking for a royal target. When his intended victim changed plans, he learned that the Austrian empress was staying nearby under a discreet name. As Elizabeth walked toward a ship, Lucchini stabbed her in the chest with a sharpened file. The wound was so small that she initially continued walking and boarded the vessel before collapsing. Tight clothing slowed the bleeding and concealed the seriousness of the injury. She died shortly afterward. Lucchini had not attacked Elizabeth because of a specific policy. He wanted to strike aristocratic society. The empress, who had spent much of her life fleeing the role of Habsburg symbol, was murdered because she embodied it. Franz Joseph reportedly said that no one could know how much they had loved one another. The statement contained the sorrow of a marriage that had failed as daily companionship, but retained a deep bond of shared life and loss. The dynasty's public rituals turned private grief into imperial theater. Habsburg funerals followed an old ceremony at the Capuchin Church in Vienna. According to tradition, the herald knocked on the door of the imperial crypt and announced the deceased by a long list of titles. The monk inside replied that he did not know the person. A shorter list was offered and rejected. Only when the herald identified the dead as a poor sinful mortal was the door opened. The ritual reminded rulers that rank ended at death. It was both Christian humility and supreme dynastic spectacle. Austria-Hungary sought new influence in the Balkans as it lost power in Germany and Italy. The decline of Ottoman authority created opportunities and danger. Russia promoted influence among Orthodox and Slavic peoples. Serbia developed national ambitions. The Habsburg government feared that South Slav nationalism could attract Croats, Serbs, and Slovenes within the monarchy. After the Russo-Turkish War, the Congress of Berlin in 1878 authorized Austria-Hungary to occupy and administer Bosnia and Herzegovina, though the provinces formally remained under Ottoman sovereignty. The occupation met fierce resistance and required significant military force. Habsburg administration later built roads, railways, schools, hospitals, courts, and government buildings. Sarajevo acquired architecture that mixed Central European and local styles. Officials attempted to promote a distinct Bosnian identity that might balance Serbian and Croatian nationalism. But modernization did not eliminate political tension. Muslim landowners, Orthodox peasants, Catholic communities, Serbian nationalists, Croatian activists, and emerging intellectuals experienced imperial rule differently. In 1908, Austria-Hungary formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. Foreign Minister Alois Ihrenthal hoped to secure control and demonstrate vitality. Instead, the annexation caused an international crisis. Serbia was outraged, Russia felt humiliated, and the Ottoman Empire protested. Germany supported Vienna, while Russia, weakened by defeat in its war with Japan and revolution at home, backed down. The crisis deepened Serbian hostility and convinced Russian leaders that another retreat would be unacceptable. Franz Ferdinand, the new heir, was an awkward figure in this volatile world. He was stubborn, suspicious, hot-tempered, and often disliked at court. He collected trophies from an enormous number of hunted animals, a passion that modern readers may find disturbing. Yet, politically, he recognized that the dual monarchy structure was unstable. He opposed Magyar dominance and considered plans to give Slavic peoples greater status, though the precise form of his intended reforms remains debated. Some imagined a federal empire. Others envisioned a triple monarchy or redesigned crownlands. Hungarian elites feared him. Serbian nationalists also feared that successful imperial reform might weaken the attraction of independence. His marriage created a personal war with court protocol. Franz Ferdinand fell in love with Countess Sophie, a Czech noblewoman who served as lady-in-waiting. Though aristocratic, she did not belong to a reigning or formerly reigning dynasty considered equal under Habsburg house law. Franz Joseph permitted the marriage only on condition that it be morganatic. Sophie would not share her husband's rank, and their children could not inherit the throne. At court, she was often humiliated, placed behind younger archduchesses, excluded from ceremonies, and denied the honors normally given to the heir's wife. Franz Ferdinand adored Sophie and resented the system that insulted her. Their marriage appears to have been affectionate and stable. Because military events applied less rigid court precedents, Sophie could sometimes accompany him on official inspections. That circumstance helped bring them together to Sarajevo in June 1914. Before reaching that fatal day, the monarchy passed through a period of apparent prosperity and underlying anxiety. The economy grew unevenly. Bohemia became highly industrialized. Hungarian agriculture supplied grain and livestock. Trieste served as the empire's main seaport, connecting Central Europe to the Mediterranean and global trade. The Austro-Hungarian Navy expanded under commanders who saw the Adriatic as a field of great power prestige. Railways shortened journeys that had once taken days. Tourism developed in the Alps and along the Adriatic coast. Coffee houses became unofficial parliaments where journalists, artists, officers, students, and political dreamers read newspapers in multiple languages. Universal male suffrage was introduced in the Austrian half in 1907, broadening political participation. Christian socialists, social democrats, German nationalists, Czech parties, Polish groups, and others competed. The parliament became more representative and more difficult to manage. In Hungary, the franchise remained much narrower, helping preserve elite Magyar control. Calls for electoral reform collided with fears that non-Magyar voters would transform the kingdom. The army worried about loyalty, modernization, and budgets. Austria-Hungary spent less on its military than some rivals, partly because Austrian and Hungarian politicians argued over funds. The officer corps preserved aristocratic traditions but increasingly included middle-class professionals. German was the main language of command in the common army, while soldiers spoke many tongues. Units used regiment languages for practical communication. The system functioned better than caricatures suggest, but mobilizing millions in a modern war would place it under unbearable strain. Franz Joseph aged into an institution. He had begun his reign before the American Civil War and remained on the throne when automobiles, airplanes, motion pictures, telephones, and wireless communication were entering modern life. Generations were born, married, and died knowing no other emperor. His regular habits became reassuring. He appeared at his desk early, dressed in uniform, processing paperwork. When advisors warned of revolutionary ideas, nationalist unrest, or new technology, he often responded within the mental world formed by 1848. The empire survived partly because no alternative satisfied everyone. Breaking it apart would create disputes over mixed territories, cities, railways, rivers, and minorities. German speakers lived among Czechs, Poles and Ukrainians shared Galicia. Romanians lived in Transylvania beside Hungarians and Germans. Serbs and Croats inhabited overlapping regions. Italians, Slovenes, and Germans met near the Adriatic and Alps. A map based on national majorities could not avoid placing millions on the wrong side of a border. The Habsburg monarchy, for all its inequality, provided a roof over complexity. This failure was not diversity itself. Its failure was the inability to create a political structure in which that diversity felt equally protected. Across the Atlantic, Habsburg subjects entered American debates about immigration and identity. Steamship lines carried families from Trieste, Fiume, Hamburg, and other ports. U.S. officials often categorized them by empire rather than ethnicity, producing confusing records. A person might be listed as Austrian though born in a village now located in Poland, Ukraine, Slovakia, Croatia, Italy, Romania, or the Czech Republic. In American factories and neighborhoods, immigrants formed mutual aid societies, churches, newspapers, and political organizations. Some supported nationalist independence movements. Others remembered imperial stability with nostalgia. The House of Habsburg had become part of American family history without ever ruling a square mile of the United States. The dynasty also fascinated American millionaires and collectors. As Europe's aristocratic world met American industrial wealth, paintings, armor, furniture, manuscripts, and decorative arts crossed the Atlantic. Museums in New York, Boston, Chicago, and elsewhere acquired works once connected to Habsburg courts. The imperial culture of Titian, Velázquez, armorers, tapestry makers, and jewelers entered public collections where citizens of a republic could study the material language of monarchy. By 1914, few observers believed a single assassination would destroy the old order. Europe had survived crises in Morocco, the Balkans, and Bosnia. Diplomats had repeatedly stepped back from war. Royal families were related across borders. German Emperor Wilhelm II, Russian Emperor Nicholas II, and British King George V belonged to an interconnected world of cousins. But kinship had never guaranteed peace. The Habsburg story itself proved that family connections often created claims, fears, and obligations that made conflict more likely. Serbia had expanded after the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913. It became a focus of South Slav nationalism and a threat in Viennese eyes. Some Serbian officials supported or tolerated secret networks dedicated to uniting Serbs outside the kingdom. The organization known as Unification or Death, commonly called the Black Hand, included military officers. A group of young Bosnian conspirators, associated with the broader movement Young Bosnia, planned to assassinate Franz Ferdinand during his Sarajevo visit. Their motives combined Yugoslav nationalism, anger at imperial rule, romantic ideas of sacrifice, and revolutionary violence. The Archduke arrived in Bosnia to observe military maneuvers. The date, June 28th, carried powerful meaning for Serbs as the anniversary of the medieval Battle of Kosovo according to the modern calendar. It was also Franz Ferdinand and Sophie's wedding anniversary. The couple traveled through Sarajevo in an open car. Security arrangements were astonishingly weak. The route had been publicized. Police and military coordination was poor. Several conspirators waited along the river. One attacker lost his nerve. Another, Nedeljko Kabrnovic, threw a bomb at the Archduke's car. The driver accelerated, and the device bounced or rolled behind, exploding under a following vehicle and injuring officers and spectators. Kabrnovic swallowed poison that failed and jumped into the shallow river, where he was captured. Franz Ferdinand reached the city hall furious. After the official reception, he decided to visit the wounded at the hospital. The motorcade route was changed, but the drivers were not properly informed. When the lead car turned onto the original route near the Latin Bridge, officials shouted that it was going the wrong way. The driver stopped and began to reverse. By extraordinary coincidence, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip stood nearby outside a food shop. He stepped forward and fired 2 shots. One struck Sophie in the abdomen. The other struck Franz Ferdinand in the neck.